Okay. Well, it's such a pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'd love it if we could just start by you telling all of the listeners a little bit about your background, what you do. I'd rather have it come from you versus me reading your bio.
Oh, fine. That's totally fine. So, hi, everyone. My name is Janae Johnson. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the Philadelphia, New Jersey area. I specialize in self harm and suicidal ideation, working with teenagers. I also work with tweens, as I call them, if they are also experiencing any type of self harm or suicidal ideation. I work with boys and girls because I get that question a lot, like, oh, do you just work with girls? It's like, nope. I also work with boys, and it's really a joy. I am also a school consultant. So I work with schools to help them understand better ways and the most effective way to navigate their behavioral system in the school setting, just so that kids don't fall through the cracks and we can really figure out the best way to support a child's emotional needs in schools. And I also write books for teenagers. So that's
Wow.
basically what I do. There's some other stuff to
Just a
sprinkle.
little bit. Just a little. Just a little.
That's a little piece.
That's fantastic. So, how did you get into this work? I'm interested in how you decided to go into this space.
Okay, so I've always had a passion for mental health and psychology. I think humans are fascinating. And even in middle school, I would pay attention to behavior and wonder why people did the things that they did. And so that
Mhm.
just kind of sparked my curiosity for behavior in the study of human development. And then when I got to high school, I took a psychology course that was made for upperclassmen, but I was only a sophomore. But my teacher said, you know what, you're really good at this, so you should stay. And then that continued just to kind of spark my interest. And then I had a personal experience being a teenager that at that time I did not know it was depression. But now I know that it was depression. And so from my personal experiences, I realized, okay, well, I feel like I needed more. And I don't blame any of the adults around me. It just wasn't a conversation. Mental health wasn't a conversation when I was growing up. Being depressed wasn't a conversation. You know, there weren't ads on TV. I saw the Say No to Drugs ads more than anything, but
Mhm.
nothing about mental health. So that's how I got started. I decided I wanted to be a me that I needed growing up.
Right. And speaking of depression, it's you mentioned that. How can parents identify the signs of depression or anxiety or other mental illness challenges? What are some of those signs?
So before we even get into signs, I always like to just encourage parents to really understand and get to know your teenager. So
Mhm.
understanding their baseline of behavior, activity, interest is going to be really important for determining if something is abnormal.
Mhm.
Um, because there are a lot of teens that are they're just quiet, and so they may not be depressed just because they're quiet or they don't mince words. So it's important to understand, and they may not be depressed because you may talk a lot but they don't. It's because sometimes that also happens. Parents are like, my child acts nothing like me, something must be wrong.
Mhm.
And that's not always the case. So it is important to understand your child's baseline first before you can start to determine what is off. So
Mhm.
when we think about depression, you would look at a decrease in mood. So a sad mood that could be occurring for 2 weeks at a time. Some people with depression, you know, they struggle with sleeping. So they may have insomnia. And then some people with depression sleep all of the time. So you want to
Mhm.
pay attention to if your child is really quiet, if they're isolating themselves, if they're sleeping too much, if they don't have an appetite, if they lose interest in a lot of their favorite activities. And actually, in the Black community, there was a research study that came out, I want to say the end of 2019, where they identified that depression in the Black community looks completely different, where
Mhm.
we will describe a lot more physiological symptoms. So we'll say, I have a stomach ache, or my tooth hurts, or we actually feel the pain, and that can indicate depression in us. So paying attention to that, if your child is saying that they have headaches, or they have stomach aches, or something physically is causing them pain.
Mhm. And are there specific ages where you see some of these depression symptoms or anxiety symptoms in certain children come about?
Well, honestly, depression can happen at any age because sadness is a very real feeling. And so, even when I'm working with teens and my families, I like to have conversations about the difference between sadness and depression.
Mhm.
Just because we're sad about something doesn't mean we're depressed, but it could mean we're depressed. So, we just have to have a very open conversation and dialogue about, how we're feeling, what's going on in our lives. Right now, we're in the middle of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Everybody probably has some level of depression because you
Mhm.
can't go outside. Your life has completely been turned upside down. And, the extroverts out there like me want to go outside and hug and touch people and, eat and do all of these things. And I cannot do any of that. So I do think it's okay for us to just kind of acknowledge that right now in this pandemic, a lot of us are just really struggling with depression.
Right. And so to that point about wanting to go outside and being, quarantined or being inside in our homes, as parents, are there ways or is there some advice you can share with us on how we can create a sense of normalcy for our families, especially around mental health and well-being?
Well, I think normal is gone. Um, so I think it's very important just to have a honest conversation about that. Normal as we have known it is gone. And
Yeah.
be open about that. Allow your child and your teen to talk about how frustrating that is without interrupting them, without, having, as I would like to call sometimes, toxic positivity, like, oh, everything's going to be all right. Don't worry. Well, considering everything that's going on, let's just not go that far. Just let them talk about how they feel, allow them to really express their frustration with it. And then to me, this is the perfect opportunity to create new traditions and new customs
Mhm.
because we are quarantined, because life is different. So now, if you wanted to make sure that all of your children or your family eat together for dinner, this is the perfect time to start implementing that tradition and that custom. If you want to make sure you implement some arts and crafts time, yes, even for your teenager and for you two parents, you need to, let off some steam. This is the perfect time to do it. So for me, establishing normalcy looks like acknowledging that life is not normal like it was, but also acknowledging that there is a silver lining here where we can create new customs, new traditions, and create that as our, I don't know, our COVID normal, if you will. And hopefully these transitions and these customs will continue beyond this pandemic.
That, those are great ideas. I love the dinner idea. What would you do though if you're a parent and your teenagers have zero desire to partake, in some of those family things and they're really struggling and really just want to be in their rooms, listening to music, you know, talking to their friends? What kind of strategies would you recommend to get a teenager to be engaged and invested in wanting to spend time with their family?
So, the very first thing I would suggest is for a parent to look within, look in the mirror, and say, do I do a good job trying to engage them? Like, am I engaging as a parent? Because some parents are just not that lively, And I mean, there's no shade, but some parents are kind of very blah as well about, wanting to engage in dinner. And so I think it's important for the parent to kind of assess, how am I presenting this information? Am I fun to be around? Or every time I'm around my teenager, am I nagging them because they didn't do this, they didn't do that, or I have questions? Is it a good time? Am I good company? Like, literally, am I good company? Because when you become a teenager, they really do have that option to say, nope, I'm going in my room. So you want to ask yourself, am I good company? And then from that answer, be honest, and then figure out like what you can do. So that's my first step. My second step would be inviting the teen into the conversation and say, hey, I want us to start having dinner. What's your favorite, or what kind of things do you like that I make? What are some things that I make that you don't actually like? um, and really just have them invest in the conversation of what dinner time should look like.
Mhm.
And that way they're kind of in the planning phase with you, and that keeps them engaged. And it's a bonding moment because you may learn something about your teen. You may learn you've been cooking steak one way and they actually like it another way. So just engaging them in that conversation is really helpful. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so those are my first two things. I really feel like engagement is important, and also making sure that you are good company for dinner.
That's great. Thank you. That's awesome. And speaking of teens and just the transition, right, from a child. Well, we just heard a great conversation. There was an amazing woman talking about her small children versus, I have teenagers. So what can parents expect in terms of that transition from childhood to adolescence?
Oh, so one
What
of
are some of the things that change and how do we deal with it?
Okay, so there are a lot of changes to expect. The very first change is you are no longer going to be the most important resource for them. So that is the biggest change. That is the hardest change because for all of their life at that point, they've looked to you. They've looked to you for guidance, for answers. Mommy, daddy, I'm hurt. This happened. And now they're going to their phones. They're going to social media. They're posting. They're creating little videos to,
Yeah.
speak diss their friends. They are not coming to you about anything. So the very first thing you want to recognize and acknowledge is that their peer and their social group becomes number one. It is top priority at this point. And my best advice, my best tool for that is for parents to stay as engaged in their social life as much as possible. So shielding them isn't really going to be helpful, but engaging with them. Oh, what friend is that? What friend are you on the phone with? Oh, you guys must really have good conversations if you're on the phone all of the time, right? And then they'll be like, yes, she always talks about this. And then you'll learn about the friend. You'll learn about their friendship. And they won't shield that from you because they feel you're interested, you're curious, but you're also learning information that you need to know in case things do go a wrong way, or in case things are wrong, or if something is wrong with your child, their friend, how to get in touch with them, and it's not a secret. So that's the biggest thing, understanding that their social friends and their social group becomes the most important thing to them. And the best way to navigate that is to stay engaged, stay invested in that with them, and be curious and learn about it.
I love that. And what happens, this is a very practical and real question for myself. What happens if you see the friend group change and you don't really particularly like the new friends? Or I'm just being very nice about that. You don't like them at all. And you'd rather they don't communicate with them.
Okay.
But you also need to respect that this might be, a different transition, or they might be people that are helping them, with their esteem or whatever that may look like. How do you talk to them about that? Or do you talk to them about that? You just let them continue the conversations and hope that they grow out of those friendships?
No, definitely talk to them about it. You always want your teen to know or understand that you have a pulse on them. Even if you're not hovering or being a tiger mom, as some people would call it, you want to make sure that you have a pulse on them. So if you notice a friend difference, just kind of mention like, oh, hey, I noticed you don't hang with, I don't know, Marquise anymore, or Tyrone anymore, or Michelle, and just see what they say. They'll, for the most part, tell you something happened, and then you can have more conversation. And then if you have the friends that you may not care for, you can ask, okay, and I've noticed you've been hanging with, Mike more. What is it that you like about Mike? How did you meet Mike? And just see what the commonality is, because you could be concerned about something that your child doesn't even notice.
Yeah.
Or you can be concerned because it triggers you to a friendship or an experience you've had, and then you have to look at yourself. But most importantly, you could be triggered and you could be upset, and your child can have complete control over the situation. Because so often parents are trying to protect that they don't give their child an opportunity to learn how to navigate certain situations. They don't give them space to make decisions on, okay, so what kind of friends do you want to have? What kind of people do you want to have in your life? Parents just jump right in and say, nope, that person's not good for you. Nope, don't talk to them. I'm blocking their number from your phone.
That's right.
And you give them an opportunity to learn how to make good choices. And then when they're 18, it's like they're looking to you for everything, and it's like, well, you're 18 now, go ahead and figure it out. And it's like you didn't give them much of an opportunity to launch in a safe environment. So allowing them to kind of have those conversations with you and asking those questions and seeing what you get before asserting your parental authority if the friend is that terrible or bad.
Right.
you know.
And I love that. Okay, that's super helpful. So can you share with us, still a teen related question, but what are some of the common misconceptions of teen behavior? Sometimes we think, oh, they're just being a boy. What's a boy being a boy? Or, they're a typical 16-year-old. They're just acting out. How
Mhm.
do you respond as a parent? What's the best way?
Well, I think when we talk about behavior or when we're talking about acting out, it's important to realize that every behavior has a function.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that someone does is for something.
Hmm.
Whether they need a reaction, they want a certain reaction, they want to feel a certain way, it is for a reason. So usually acting out is because they're trying to get a need met. And it's very possible that they don't know what that need is. Or it's possible that they are sharing the need, but as a parent, you're not hearing it,
Mm.
because that also happens.
Yeah.
Frequently. And, or on the other end of this, it could also be because outside life and stresses are really heavy and they are comfortable at home. And so they kind of let it all out while they're at home because they can't while they're in school, at that Catholic school, that private school, or, they can't let it out of that public school. Like, they can't let it out. So they'll come home and release because they feel safe.
Mm.
So there could be a number of reasons why we see teens act out, but those are like some misconceptions that parents will have, like, oh, I do everything for them and they come back in here and they act like this, and, they don't care, they don't appreciate anything. But sometimes it's because your child feels safe enough to, unleash and to let their hair down while they're at home versus anywhere else. And wouldn't you want that? More
And
than
then
like,
how do you respond? So, like in the case of somebody that's acting out or acting like a complete fool, right? And if you're old school, you can't beat them. That doesn't work. We know that. You could try taking the door off. That we've done that. That doesn't work. What do you do in the case of defiance or acting out, as you call it? But if it's defiant behavior, you say no. It's COVID-19 right now. You cannot leave the house, but they leave anyway. And then they're putting everybody in the house in jeopardy. What do you do as a parent when you're struggling? Because to your point, on one side, it's like, that's great. They feel safe. So they can unleash and let their hair out, let their true self come out. But sometimes that behavior is not okay. And so as a parent, what do you do?
well, I'm always a big advocate of education and understanding. And I say that because it's important to even ask your teen, hey, what's up? What's going on? Without laying down the law, right? Without doing all of those things, just, hey, what's going on? Like, what's happening, right? These behaviors are unsafe. I'm concerned. You may not pay attention to how, if you do A, B happens and potentially C happens. And so I'm just trying to understand where we are, how you're feeling, so that we can figure out best steps for your behaviors, because right now the behaviors you're exhibiting, they're pretty unsafe. Can you see how they're unsafe? And really just engaging in that conversation, because a lot of teens, the part of their brain to make good sound decisions is not fully developed yet.
Yeah.
And so we get mad at them and we get frustrated, but they really don't have the equipment. Like, if we're really thinking about it, they don't have all of the equipment in order to make the best decisions. So as parents, it's our job, educators, adults, to help guide them. But guiding them isn't just telling them what to do. Guiding them is helping them think through it, helping them think through the feeling, helping them. Someone said, all feelings are okay, all behaviors are not. Yes. But if we don't help them think through how their feeling is then connected to their behavior, and then how the behavior gets connected to a consequence, it doesn't matter. So just telling them to do something because you said so is not effective, as we know from over all of the years. And so what that takes is a little bit more, I suppose, patience, to really have a conversation about how A leads to B leads to C. Okay, you may be able to skip D, but what happens if you get to E? Really just kind of helping them understand and navigate. And I think that's the part that gets what's the word, left out especially in the Black community, because we have a very strong attachment to hierarchy, to the elders, to being respectful. We have a very strong attachment to that, and there's nothing wrong with it, but we do have to pay attention to respect, and or disrespect is not a child asking a question.
Right.
Disrespect is not a child trying to seek understanding. And I think sometimes we're just frustrated with their behavior that we lash out that they're responding. Just
Right.
the fact that they're responding is like, you're so disrespectful. And it's like, no, they really need some understanding. And
Well,
so
they want to ask why all the time. Why? And sometimes you, like as a parent, especially like, because I said so. But that doesn't work, as we know. But that's what our parents said to us. Just because I said so, go sit over there.
And I'm so glad that you said that, because old habits die hard. Just because
Right.
our parents parented us one way and we feel we turned out fine, no comment,
Right.
I will go too far off into that part, that doesn't mean that there aren't other ways that are effective, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
there are still, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a spectrum of ways to communicate, and there's a spectrum of ways for understanding, and that's okay. So just because, your parent may have said, I said so, and you might have been the person that was just like, all right, mama said it, so I'm fine, doesn't mean your teen is the exact same.
No,
And
correct.
they need more of a conversation, or they may need more of, okay, so they may need suggestions. Okay, well, if I don't go outside, what else can I do? And then
Right.
as a parent, that is something you have to take in, because that's what relationships are about. They're about compromise. What's the give and take? If I don't want them to go outside, can I buy them a gaming system? Like really thinking about and engaging in compromise instead of it just being no, because I said so, and not helping them connect from
Right.
A, B, C to D to E.
Right. I think that patience is so key in developing the relationship versus looking for the win or looking to be right. Because I know that's what I have done, incorrectly many times. But learning to have patience is critical.
And so even from a behavior modification perspective, understanding that there will be this burst of so once you start laying down the law, they still may act out a little bit more, because now I'm mad, mom
Right.
or dad, or they're putting a limit on this, and I'm gonna listen to them, but they're putting a limit on this, and they're doing it in a new way. They may be doing it in a way that I expect. They're doing it in a way that's clear, concise, and I don't have to guess. So I'm gonna spike, but I'm gonna come right back down, because I need the faith and the expectation. The other part of that is sometimes parents do not understand that the directives that they give are not clear. One day they say A, the next day they say B, the next day A is okay again, and then B is okay again. That gets confusing. And then you get mad at them if they do B, but that day you wanted them to do A. We can't operate. I mean, you can operate that way. However, we have to look at the end result that you want. But when we're talking about
consistency, you're saying consistency critical, right? Okay.
Yes, I used to tell one parent, I love all of my families that I've worked with, but her in particular, she would kind of do that, and I would tell her, I need you to pick which train you want to be on. And she would just look at me, and she would get it, after I had the first, explanation and everything. And every time she would go back, I'm like, and then she's like, I got to pick a train. Yes. Which train do you want to be on? Because sometimes parents will do things or agree to things because they want to, appease a child, or they're not thinking of any other alternative, or they don't want to say, you know what, I need time to think about it, or they're okay with it at one time, and then their mind changes, but then they don't come back to communicate that, their thoughts change or something change, and then they just get irritated and become irritable about it, or they're not super comfortable with something, but then you say yes. So then when the teen goes and does the thing, now you're mad and you're being cranky, but it's like you agreed to it. It's okay to set a boundary, but set the boundary fully understanding why you're setting the boundary, not just because it's what your parents did, not just because it was something you were never able to do, right? Because parents do that too. Well, I wasn't able to do that growing up. That does not mean that couldn't or can't be a thing for your teen now. So.
Right.
I
That's
just
great.
on about this.
No, that's great. That's really helpful. I think, for many of us, that are parents, all of us, really, there's no manual that when you give birth that says, here's what to do and everything's going to work out perfectly. And
right.
so a lot of times our children, we all have perceptions of what our children are going to grow up to be. And
Mhm.
sometimes we realize, wait, that's not necessarily the case. There might be nuances, and we have to learn a different way of operating ourselves in order to meet our children where they are because they're so different. So, can you share some resources for parents who might be, struggling with learning how to deal with children with mental health issues, mental wellness issues? What are the resources out there? And I'm particularly thinking about people that may have lost their jobs, that are really just trying to put food on the table and keep their roof over their head. What are some of the resources that you would recommend or that are out there potentially?
Yeah, so in terms of mental health resources, the number one thing I really recommend is, like you just said too about parents, it doesn't come with a guidebook, but understand that there are books out there that can guide you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hear parents say that, like, it doesn't come with a parent book, a playbook. I'm like, no, but there are so many resources out there. So the freest thing you can do is go to Google and literally type in exactly what you're struggling with, what you need support with, and read some free articles, read blogs, listen to podcasts, go on social media, find those mommy groups, those mom pages, and listen to the content that they put out there. People find communities and Facebook groups and, all of that. And so for me, that is really the beautiful thing about the internet and social media is that you can connect with people that you may not have normally been able to connect with that
Mm-hmm.
could have experience in something that you're going through. So for me, those are really good ground resources and connections. And again, it's just about searching keywords because someone could have a child with autism, someone could have a child that's self-harming or suicidal, or have a learning disability, right? Learning disabilities show up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Don't talk about that a lot in terms of education and how that could also spearhead behavioral issues and defiance. And so for me, those are some really great resources.
Mm-hmm.
Most states usually have like a behavioral health or a mental health website where you could also see what free programs are available. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if anyone has insurance at the moment, even if you have state insurance, you can always call their member services number and ask them and say, again, hey, I have a teen. This is what we're going through. What kind of programs do you all provide and offer? And they will tell you everything that they have.
Which is awesome. Yeah.
Yes. And a lot of people, we don't think about going straight out. When I worked in family-based, I'm like, I'm going to the source. I've always been that kind of person. And then I made my relationships and people are like, how did you do that fast? I went to the source and I built relationships. So those are some really good free options at the moment to really get support and resources to help you navigate what you and your team could be going through.
Yeah. Those are great ideas. I would also add, my husband and I started a free, confidential, safe space for parents of Black and Brown boys to talk about issues, and it's called the SonRise Project. And so every Sunday morning at 9 a.m., we host a call with an expert like yourself, because we are not experts at all, nor do we proclaim to be, but we share our journey with our own teenagers, I should say. And then we have experts speak on various topics, to your point. So it's all different types of topics. And so would suggest that as well. It's called the sonriseproject.com. And it's free and confidential. So thank you for that. I want to ask you, you mentioned something earlier when you were introducing yourself and we were talking around self-harm and focusing on self-harm, people who have those issues and so I'd like to understand, for families who may have had children who've engaged in self-harm, what can parents do and what can they expect in terms of professional treatment options?
A very great question. So when we're talking about self-harm, it is really going to be important to, one, pay attention. Again, I said pay attention to your teen, but noticing their skin. So right now, it's the spring. We're all locked in the house, but if you are noticing that your child is always wearing hoodies, I mean, I don't know,
Mhm.
we all might be in hoodies right now because we're home relaxing, but if it's really hot outside and their clothing doesn't seem to match, it's possible that they're hiding scars. If you know, and scarring usually occurs on the arms and the legs, places where they could reach because, you know, they're self-harming themselves. And there are a number of ways teens can self-harm. They can cut, they can burn with a lighter, and they don't necessarily just use the lighter and burn themselves. They use the lighter to heat it up, and then they take that heat from it and create a smiley. So if you've ever seen a lighter, it looks like a I know, Kelly, I know. It looks like a smiley face actually after, you know, a teen burns themselves. So
Mhm.
you want to pay attention to their skin. Yes, like somebody said, doing body checks. You want to pay attention to their skin. You want to pay attention to if they're all of a sudden dressing differently. You want to pay attention to this. I haven't had this happen much, but if a teen is attempting suicide, right, you could find markings on their neck. If they are tying something, you know, around their neck, you could see that bruising. So you want to pay attention to their body, their skin, and you want to ask questions. It's going to cause a reaction, right? If you start seeing cuts, things that might have been healed, and you're going to feel a lot of emotion. But I just really encourage you to take a deep breath and then ask questions. And so questions that you want to ask are these recent? How long have you been, you know, harming yourself? Do you know what causes you to harm yourself? Are there any situations? And just try to get some information. But then my very next suggestion and step is to just go ahead to crisis. You can go to the emergency room. Emergency rooms tend to triage, however, COVID-19. So it's not as, you know, easy just to go into an ER. So you would call your local crisis center. Most counties and states have a mobile crisis team. So the mobile crisis team could actually come out to your home and do the assessment. So depending on where you are, what resources are available, I would always suggest going, because if that's the first time you've ever noticed or saw that your teen self-harmed, then you had no idea what's happening. And it's important just to go ahead and get them evaluated so that the person at the facility could gain more information about the severity of the self-harm, if they are also suicidal attached to that self-harm, and what their triggers are, so that we can kind of create a plan. And someone said in the chat, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read everything else, but not blaming yourself, that is so pivotal, because you feel bad, like, I miss this, I miss that. No, teens are good at hiding stuff. Humans, people are good at hiding stuff. If they don't want you to know something, they're going to find a way for you to not know something. So don't blame yourself. And then on the flip side of that, if you did notice something and you didn't say anything, just acknowledge that that occurred and find ways to talk about, okay, how can I not, you know, ignore it the next time? How can I be more present the next time? What can I do? But still don't blame, but just be honest and acknowledge if you did see signs but just didn't know how to act, so that you can work through those feelings.
That's great. And similarly, I think a similar question around not self-harm, but addiction issues. So if you know, what are the resources out there? How should parents act if they are concerned about, you know, marijuana or, you know, harder drugs or alcohol or anything that their teenager is using?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting one because substance abuse in teens, the model that is still kind of widely used is abstinence. Just don't, you know, don't do drugs. That is still kind of a very big thing. And so unfortunately, it does leave this area of room for not actually treating the teen. It's just kind of like, okay, stop doing it. And we all know that's just kind of like, I said so. So it's not really effective. But what I always suggest is IOP groups, which are considered intense outpatient groups. So those groups are usually compromised so that teens are able to connect with other teens about 3 times a week. And those teens typically are dealing with the same issue. So substance abuse counselors are running those groups and helping teens understand the impacts of alcohol, the impacts of, you know, drugs and how it impacts their body, how it could potentially impact their growth since their brain is at the most rapid, growth phase in their lives. And so I would always say if you have a teen that's using substances, you want to get them connected to a substance use program, even if it's just for psychoeducation. You want to get them involved because I just feel that teens just don't have enough information. They don't know about everything. And they're not going to really come to their parents, but they just don't know, oh, how could this affect me? And again, because I like to ask questions, asking them, well, what's going on? Because most of the time when you see marijuana use or alcohol use, it's because there are other feelings they're covering up. There's a trauma that they may have experienced and they're trying to cover it. They have anxiety and the weed may calm them down. So alcohol and substance abuse also has a function. So again, kind of getting down to it like, okay, well, do you notice that when do you smoke? And you may notice they only smoke when they have anxiety about a test. Or you may notice that they only do it when they're about to go see a certain family member. And those are kinds of things that can give you indications that there are other things going on and they're using the substance as a coping skill. And then I think that also helps to navigate treatment. But those are my suggestions. So for me, with adolescents, substance abuse is still more collaborative and comprehensive in terms of family therapy is needed. Intensive outpatient groups is needed. So maybe some trauma work, depending on what's going on. If addiction runs in the family, I've had a case like that where addictions ran in the family, and that took a lot of work because then that meant getting them out of the household and a lot of other things, medical issues arose. And so it does depend on the child, but it is definitely a collaborative and collective treatment approach.
Uh-oh, I see a frozen screen. I'm not sure if everybody else is seeing that.
I can hear you, but I'm not sure.
Okay, I can see you again. Great.
Okay. I'm like, I see you. All right.
I heard everything. It was freezing a little bit. Wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you for that. We got a question that popped up in the chat about their child has addiction to pornography with constant use of the internet. So thoughts or help or advice around that, Janae?
Well, I think, again, I would kind of want to know, what else is happening in that teen's life. I don't have expertise in addiction or addiction with pornography either. So there may be a subset that's very specific to that. But what I would wonder is what else is kind of built into their teen's life. Were they exposed to anything at a young age? Did something occurred? Were they exposed to pornography? Just kind of gaining some background information just so that we can understand the function of watching pornography for that child. But again, I would reach out to any type of county facility, but therapy is always a good start with trying to understand what's going on, because all therapists will create or collect background information to do a full biopsychosocial assessment to even identify what is the best practice, what is the best treatment option. So often we try to do that I don't want to say at a surface level with not a lot of information, and we could be missing out on other things that are more pressing or more important. So I would even just get started with a therapy referral so that you can tell, the therapist everything that's going on, and they can kind of help direct and guide what would be the next best steps or what would be the plan for treating that, because it may be layered. There may be trauma, and you may have to deal with, the trauma on top of the addiction, on top of like a harm reduction tactic to just kind of help decrease the use of the internet. And then you may have to do some replacement behaviors. And so it could be a lot, and it may take a long time. And I think that's one thing I want parents to understand. Treatment isn't a quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
It can take years. It can take 3 months, but you really want to just be involved in the process from start to finish, and really just kind of buy into it because it's just not quick. And I know you want it to be quick because you've been dealing probably with it for such a long time, but It doesn't.
Definitely not a quick fix. I completely concur. A couple of questions from some of the listeners. The first one is, how can anxiety and depression, or both, be identified in children on the spectrum?
So in my experience, and again, I don't specialize in children on the spectrum, but I have worked with children on the spectrum. What I've noticed is you will see their anxiety and their depression. Again, it's understanding their baseline. So you want to understand how they navigate. So I had a client that never paced. She never walked around. She wasn't a pacer, but when she was anxious, that's when she would pace. And so again, it took me time to really get to know her, to understand that she doesn't normally walk around in a circle pacing, but when she is anxious and frustrated, that is when I would notice that she was dealing with some anxiety and struggling with that. And so it's important to really know, again, your child's baseline and know what they do normally versus what is abnormal. And then I think too, depending on your child's level of functioning, you want to have a code word. I'm good for code words, and I'm good for, ways to communicate. That way, if a child is feeling overwhelming or feel overwhelmed by a certain feeling, they don't have to engage in a lot of communication. They could just say popcorn, and popcorn means that they're at their max and that they need extra support, and you have to just jump right in and kick into the plan. And so I think especially during this pandemic, it could be a good idea to really sit with your family and your teens and ask them, okay, this is how I see you, right? I see you as quiet, like to isolate, be in your room, think we all suck. Is that right? Is that true? And see how they engage with that, and then continue the conversation like, okay, so I know you like to be in your room, but how do I know you're okay? And engage in that conversation some more, and then see what they say. And then, you could come up with a code word for them as well that way.
Right. Love that. A person asks, can you repeat the type of group for substance abuse? It was the IOP, I believe.
Yes. So it is intensive outpatient.
There's also PHPs, I think, too, partial hospitalization programs. So like all day versus partial day, right?
So, yeah, sure. If you want, I can go through the differences.
Yes, that would be great.
IOP is intensive outpatient. So those are groups, and those groups usually run for about 2 to 3 hours, and they're typically after school so that the kids can get to, the facility. And those are about 2 to 3 times a week, typically, and they're topical. So like I said, intensive outpatient is we're all here because we do drugs. And we're going to talk about that 3 times a week with a curriculum, with a certified, substance abuse counselor. That's what we're doing. So those are intensive outpatient groups. They're topical. They happen multiple times a week at a longer duration, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Partial hospitalization programs are programs that say, hey, you need a little bit more support than IOP. You kind of need 6 to 8 hours of this. And so instead of going to school, you'll come here and you'll do some education, but we're going to work really hard on your mental health and your psychiatric treatment for 6 hours a day. And then you get to go home, practice those skills, and then you get to come back to us the next morning. And so PHP programs have a shorter time frame in terms of program length, because of course you can't be there for a whole year or forever and ever. So you could be there for a few weeks, like 3 weeks, because it's intense, right? You're going for 6 hours a day. We're learning, we're trying it. We're learning, we're trying it, because you're in a new environment to test those things out, and then you go home. And then from the PHP, you would go to a inpatient facility, which would be a 24/7 hour care. Because maybe you were self-harming, maybe you were suicidal, or your team was homicidal, and they need care 24/7. Maybe it's medication management, because there the psychiatrist will be able to give them medication and monitor how their body responds to it, which is super critical and important. And so they're there 24/7 navigating that, making sure that they can stay safe. And then there's a residential facility where the child has probably gone through IOP, PHP, multiple inpatients, group, all kinds of everything, and they're still struggling to navigate in the community. And so then they would go live somewhere I like to keep them close enough to their family to visit so we can work on family therapy stuff. But then, they would go live somewhere on a campus where everything is there, school, their housing, and they're being monitored as well 24/7, but could be upwards to a year.
Right. Yeah. Yes, understand. And thank you for all of that.
I know.
There's just a couple more questions. That looks like, how can parents tap into therapy resources that the school may offer during COVID?
Oh, great question. So the difficult part about this in terms of schools is it depends on the school type. So I typically partner and consult with independent schools, and so they have more flexibility over the therapists that they hire, that they contract with. But a lot of the school counselors, the guidance counselors, and those kind of individuals at schools are still checking in on students. I have a lot of friends that are school counselors, and I know that they're still checking in. And so I would just contact the school administrator, the principal, the secretary, and just ask, hey, are the counselors still seeing students virtually? How can I, be a part of that? Especially if your child, and this is key, if your child wasn't being seen by the school counselor prior to leaving school, they may not be on that school counselor's roster. So if you feel that your child needs some extra support, go ahead and call so that they know that your child is looking for some extra support. They'll reach out to the counselor, I'm sure, and then the counselor will, follow up. Again, this could be for different schools, but that is usually how it works. It's just like, as long as the principal knows that there's an interest, or, they will make sure that your child gets some support. And if that school counselor can't, they could probably also connect you to resources in the community as well.
Perfect. Okay. Next question, what are some of the best, what are some best practices when dealing with a child or a teen who has body image challenges?
Okay. Again, asking them how they feel, what's their body, before telling them, don't think like that. What do you mean? You're so beautiful. All that stuff is great, but you want to figure out why they feel that way, or what part of their body, or if someone said something, or what dynamic are they in. I work with a lot of young girls who may be the only one of two Black girls in a white school. So they may not see the same beauty standard, and that can impact them. So again, you just want to ask questions to figure out what's going on, what they heard, what they see. And I'm going to be honest here. I want you to also reflect as a parent, if you say certain things to your teen. Like, do you tell them, oh, you don't need another donut? They'll put that down. You don't need that, because we have to be honest here sometimes about how we talk and we communicate to our youth. So we want to be mindful, and we want to be honest and real with ourselves that, as a parent, we could have unintentionally gave them, contributed to some body challenges or some body issues. And then second, a more practical thing to do is ask them, this is something that I do. I will tell all of my girls, okay, do you feel the images on social media impact you? If they say yes or no, but you typically yes, I say, okay, let's scrub your Instagram. And I will have them in session go through their Instagram and unfollow the people that make them feel some kind of way, or make them feel that we do it right then and there. And I'm being nosy, I'm looking, to make sure they're doing it. And then maybe in another session, we would spend time adding people back to their Instagram that make them feel good about themselves. I'm not one of the therapists that'll say social media is gone, it doesn't exist. It's here to stay. So now the key is to make sure they understand how to best utilize it. And so that's a practical thing that I do if my youth are struggling with body image, because more than likely they're looking at the screen all day.
And that's great advice for parents as well. I think for all of us, really. That's fantastic. Yes. And then the next question, me and my ex-husband don't agree on therapy. How do I get him on board?
Well, great question. First things first, it depends on the age of your teen. In the state of Pennsylvania, the age of consent is 14. So it wouldn't matter what you or your ex-husband said necessarily if we were here in PA, because if the teen wanted to go, they could come. If they wanted to stop, they could also stop. I just always like to put that out there. So it does depend on the age of consent. So depending on where you are, you want to research the age of consent for mental health. And that will...
so this person saying that her child is 10.
Okay, so then you would need both parents' consent. And what I would do and what I have done is just take time to talk to your ex-husband about why he doesn't agree. Just to hear him out. You know, he could have some very valid concerns. That's the thing. I'm a therapist. I'm super bubbly, but I'm not going to act like people shouldn't have concerns about going to therapy. Traditionally, we've had issues. Every therapist isn't the right fit for us. So I get it. So just ask him, what are his issues about it? Hear him out, see what he says, and then try to compromise. Like, okay, well, can we try it out for a month or two? You know, can we see, let's be in the process together. Do you want to research some therapists? I research some. We come together, we figure it out. Make it a collaborative effort and a collaborative conversation. I have found a lot of success doing that, even looping, you know, the dads in for my teens. Sometimes they don't always come initially, even if the teen is over 14, but I'll circle back and call them. Hey, just wanted you to know, I know you found out she was coming to see me. Is there some insight you want to add? And they're always like, oh, well, okay, you know, and then they buy in, and then it's never an issue after that. So
Right.
get some buy-in.
That's wonderful. And I think this is the last question. Oh, yes. How do you work with youth that are in care? And is there anything different in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic?
So I feel like if you are doing everything virtually, that's very different from being face to face and kind of having that. And so for me, it's been very pivotal to prepare for sessions beforehand and preparing for things that I can send them. So I found some resources that are like Word documents, and I will send it to the parent and say, hey, I want them to work on this up through page 8. And then when we see each other next time, she'll have it done and we can share screens. I get to see it, I get to comment. And so I think it does require a lot more or a bit more, depending on how you prepare before, preparation and ease, right? Fun. You still want to be fun. You still want to kind of, sometimes for my girls groups, I had Beyonce playing before the group started so that, you know, when they logged in, they heard Beyonce. So just figuring out some different ways to just, you know, keep them engaged, keep yourself lively, because it can be hard to be home and just, you know, sitting behind the computer, but definitely engaging and planning more has been something that I've noticed. But it's really worked to my benefit because I don't feel like I'm twiddling my thumbs. They don't feel like they're twiddling their thumbs. And we really are able to still get some very good work done, even in the middle of COVID-19. And think about it this way, they really have an opportunity to exercise some of those skills that we talked about or that you've been working on in therapy because they're home. So, you know, it's easier to say, hey, let's work on this. They kind of don't have anything else to do. So they're kind of open to trying anything. So go for it.
That's fantastic. So I love all of the advice you've shared. This has been really, really helpful. How can people get in touch with you, Janae?
Oh, awesome. So I am on Instagram primarily under Teen Talk Therapy. That is also my website. There's a blog there, some video, all that good stuff, podcasts, interviews. So spend some time on the website. I'm on Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook as well under Teen Talk Therapy. So.
Under Teen Talk Therapy. Okay, wonderful.
I'm excited to chat with you all. Thank you.
It's been fantastic. I believe Danielle Adamson is going to be popping on from NBCDW. So I believe there she is.
Here I am. Thank you so much, ladies. This was such a great conversation. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Janae. Just to provide some more context to our participants, Janae owns Teen Talk, a premier therapy and consultation company, and is also an award-winning teen therapist. She is also the co-founder of the Black Brain Campaign, a nonprofit geared to eradicate the stigma of Black mental health. She's also been named one of the top 10 Black female therapists to know by the Huffington Post, and is a sought-after speaker on teen emotional issues featured in Black Enterprise, ThriveWorks, Essence, the Philadelphia Tribune, and the critically acclaimed podcast Therapy for Black Girls, among others. And this critical session was moderated by Kelli Richardson Lawson, and Kelli is an Emmy award-winning creative visionary and purpose-driven business leader with over 30 years of leadership experience in brand building. As founder and CEO of the Joy Collective, Kelli leads a company inspired and committed to creating joy for their clients, our community, and the world. And earlier this year, Kelli launched the SonRise Project, a safe space for parents of children who are struggling with mental illness as well as addiction. She is a proud mother of 2 teenage sons, and Kelli has experienced these challenges firsthand and hosts weekly calls at quote unquote SonRise to allow other parents to share and learn from one another. So thank you again, Janae and Kelli. You were absolutely amazing. And we are so grateful for your invaluable insight during this critical discussion. Participants, our next session is a part of our Lunch and Learn session series entitled Practicing Self-Care and Wellness for Parents and Caregivers, featuring Christine St. Bill, which will start momentarily. So until then, I hope that you take care and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.